Hello everyone, thank you and welcome to this PDW, how to access a spiritual reading of what leaders do, deciphered by Singularity. Thank you very much. Let's get started. Catherine Voynnet-Fourboul, who is senior lecturer at Université Paris II, Panthéon-Assas, and chair of the Management and Spirituality Lab in France. Let's introduce this PDW.
Hey, thank you very much, Eric. I'm so happy to be with you. I know that progressively more people will join, but it's time to introduce a little bit this PDW. As you know, we work with Eric as a researcher on the theme of identity. And we think that it's not so obvious to reflect on our identity, and it's nevertheless fruitful to do it both at the individual level and at the organizational level. We can gain a better alignment of our action with a well-identified identity. So the issue is that we discover our identity progressively over time, and some of us are lucky to become who they are. So can you show Patrick the next slide? We will also insist in this statement of Friedrich Nietzsche. He said, become who you are, okay, and do what you alone can do. So this is the question of singularity that is raised here. And during the PDW, we'll have the following agenda. Our professional development workshop will be carried out in 4 parts. First of all, an introduction. Second, some theoretical fruits about singularity and identity. And third, the presentation of a meta-categorization that reveals to be helpful when working on identity. And fourth, some discussion and reflection you can exercise yourself on your identity. And so we hope you can situate yourself in the path of your self-discovery. So who are we? But first of all, I'm a lecturer, as said Eric, at the University of Panthéon-Assas. I am very interested in spirituality, and I chair some institution that exist in France and with people speaking French. So we try to develop something inspired by what is done at MSR. But MSR is only in English, and so we wanted to have also something in French. And so this is why we have this management and spirituality lab in France with many people speaking French outside of France, naturally. And I will discuss the spiritual dimension of identity. Then we have Patrick. Patrick is the founder and the CEO of Patrick Mathieu Singularity. He's mainly a consultant, and he likes also to make some research. After working on how different brands were situated on their market, he develops ideas to better understand organizations and invented a theory of singularity as a new management tool. He will present his discovery. And we have also Eric Gautier. He's a PhD. He did his thesis on the topic of the identity, singularity, while being an observer, participant in the consulting company of Patrick. He's now a researcher, teacher, practitioner in management sciences. And he will explain how to access the black box of identity. David Moriez is sorry not to attend the PDW, and hope you will excuse him. We hope we will have a better health next time. He's an associate professor at Paris ISC, And his recent research focuses on the mediating roles and effects of the self and values on motivation and performance. So we can consider that our team is a mixture of researchers and consultants passionate about the question of identity and spirituality. And we presented yesterday a paper on the positive impact of identity concerning inclusion. As an introduction, I would say that when we have reflected together on the question of identity, both from a theoretical point of view and in its practical use, we have retained its definition in terms of what remains stable and what does not change. However, it is clear that the perception of identity may change with time and the experience of one's identity. We therefore started from the practical approaches to identity in companies operated by a consultant and tried to show the spiritual dimensions of the different steps to achieve a clarification of identity. When working on spirituality, there is often the dimension of who we are and the part played by our soul in the animation of our body. In France, some consultants, just like Alain Etchegoyen, mentioned that companies have a soul. They define the soul both as substance and movement. The soul is the spirit of the company. The restlessness of the soul pervades the entire body, the entire company. Brands are there to serve as a reference point, but the soul is constantly transforming the company. Identity seems to be revealed once and for all, while the soul never surrenders definitively. It is built in time, it escapes instantaneous photographs. It is possible to identify the soul by analyzing the discourse within the company, the perception, the practices in action, by observing what is moving, and by having access to the desires that circulate within the company. Eric will show some aspect of the workshop objectives.
Yes, the workshop's promise consists in the work on singularity that allows to understand the identity of the leader as well as that of the company, encourage an interior spiritual approach for the leader and his team to consolidate the organizational identity, and clarify the organizational identity and strengthen its positioning on the market. So let's begin with a theoretical framework. By carrying out our work on organizational and their own identity, managers may have to wonder about meaning, awareness, but also well-being, consideration, and benevolence. These notions are part of the field of spiritual leadership. In addition, identity and spirituality are ontological constructs that include distinct perspectives about the nature of what is. They affect several common variables of organizational interest, such as loyalty, commitment, turnover, citizenship behavior, and even organizational performance, and thus have implications in organizational behavior and strategic management. However, there are few explanations about how to establish a link between these two constructs. Thus, this workshop will consist in making you approach the two concepts of identity and spirituality using a methodology led by Patrick Mathieu. It consists to lift the veil of singularity and to provoke a revelation as an inner spiritual process.
So now, how to access the spiritual reading of what leaders do, we propose to investigate the question of identity and its dimensions from a spiritual perspective. We can distinguish inside the self different aspects. Psychologists mention the fact that it happens to live a restricted part of our identity as if we were using a diminished identity. Perhaps this is why Mark Gaffney, who is the follower of Ken Wilber, developed a review of literature on the unique self that I propose to share. The evolution of personal realization within the trajectory of individual development takes place through 4 stations. First, the separate self, which is our everyday ordinary self. Second, the false self, which is a distorted or unhealthy expression of our separate self. Third, the true self, which is our impersonal consciousness or our inner self, the essence of our true nature or identity. And fourth, the unique self. Unique self is the personal face of essence or ultimate nature, spark, or love intelligence that lives in you, as you, and through you. The unique self is revealed in moments of flow and grace. Unique self means you are both unique and distinct, and that is basis for singularity. Unique self is a practice of recognizing the profundity of your own life, the preciousness of your specific perspective, history, and talents, and the opportunity to become fully who you already are. Then there is also the idea that true self plus perspective equal unique self. It means that the true self is always looking through a perspective. We are invited to evolve beyond our personal ego, beyond separate self and false self, in order to realize our deeper identity as the true self. We never evolve beyond ego. We evolve beyond exclusive identification with ego. Our personalized expression of true self is our unique self. So we resist from considering our ego as something bad. The ego has wisdom to offer because it prefigures the unique self. Unique self is fully realized only after transcending narrow identification with ego and identifying with one's true nature. This realization of unique self is the core of integral evolutionary enlightenment. To be unique means to be singular. This singularity merges and integrates one into the ultimate universal, the whole, in which every part participates. So ego contains within it a glimmer of truth. It prefigures unique self, or ego bears gifts that require clarification. Clarification can only happen after we break our exclusive identification with the separate self. We could stay at the level of identification with ego. So what could help us to move beyond an exclusive identification with our ego? The answer is the evolutionary impulse of love. While we love another human being, we are able to perceive his or her true, infinite, and radiant nature as part of the whole, perceive the infinite specialness and divine beauty of the beloved, to see his or her true nature, his or her unique self. So while answering the next different questions that we imagine at the end of our formal presentation, we suggest you focus, of course, on you, but also on love. Patrick.
Okay, so now I will introduce the concept of singularity, the way we define it. So this cotton candy figure is here to explain the difference between what we call identity and singularity. Identity is the visible part, is about substance, and as Catherine just said, is what we experience, is what we build over time. And our identity is something that's adaptative, that bears our will. and it's expressed all along our way. We live within our identity, and the identity must change, not all of it, of course, but some of it, to adapt. And the impact of identity is affective links. I like you, I don't like you. I love you, I don't love you. And also conflicts. We know racial conflicts, we know conflicts between countries, conflicts between cultures. So identity is something we need to manage every day. And the root, the structure behind the identity, which here is the stick of the cotton candy, is this singularity that refers to the soul, as Catherine was just saying, the true self. Singularity, as a difference to identity, is something that's invisible. It's about the essence, it's about the deep identity, the true self. What we discovered over about 20 years of research on singularity is that singularity is unique. It's stable over time. It's present from the start. Even within a company, for example, the singularity is present with the founder. It generates constraints because something that never changes, that's inside of us, that we haven't built ourselves, is something we need to discover, we need to appreciate, we need to learn how to use it, and it's generating constraints that help us grow. So every time we investigate, we learn, we progress with our singularity, we build a capital, and we go into our destiny. And the good aspect of singularity is that it's not about competition. Singularity doesn't mean just you're different. Singularity means you're unique, and every unique person has a place on earth. So it brings something with dimension of universality and harmony. So identity is about something that has to be recognized. And that's why we spend our time explaining who we are and who our companies are, because we want them to be recognized by the others. Singularity also has a root of development, but it's about something that has to be revealed over time. And the exercise we're going to have you do a little later is about how far you've been revealing your own singularity. So singularity has led us to discover that there are different families, different groups of people, of businesses that have different approaches to singularity. So we're not going to develop all of that here because it would take a lot of time. But the key notions are that singularity is based on 3 dimensions which relate to physics. And these 3 dimensions are time and space, are energy, and matter. So these 3 dimensions exist within people. We have a notion of time, space, values, things that are important for us. We have energy, ability to move, to change, to challenge things, to build, to conquer. And we have a relationship to matter, which is, first of all, our body, but our experience globally, our relationships, and what we perceive from the world. So these 3 dimensions add and form unity, and they are expressed on 3 levels, which are the why we do things, how we do things, and what we do out of that. So this combination creates 6 families, 6 cores that we describe with these 6 colors. And I want to introduce them to you just to help us understand how this notion of spirituality is expressed within each of these singularity cores. So, as I said, and I'm taking here examples with people.
With leaders, mainly.
Yeah, so this, in that case, it's founders of very famous companies. So we've got Walt Disney, Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Steve Jobs for Apple, and Richard Warren for Sears. So these 6 cores have key motivations. So I'm going to introduce them very quickly. The 2 on the top with the blue colors are the ones that are dominated by what we call the sovereign dimension, which is time and space. So a person like Walt Disney and his company. They're driven by the necessity to be a reference in what they do and own their legitimate place. We'll see a few more examples later. And this is something that drives companies to expand and to search to really become a reference in what they are. The ones on the right, with the case of Sears, are companies that are driven by time. Time means also values, but means also life and protection of life. So these companies are driven by everything that has to do mostly with time. Now, if we go down to the left, we have what we call the cosmic warriors and the human warriors. So these companies are driven by energy, which means also they want to be big and they want to grow. But what's important in their soul is their energy and what they bring to the world. So the case of Nike, for example, is interesting because Nike is a company where what was done to develop the company was to change the rules of the game. Nike doesn't sell sport items. Nike sells items for everyone who has a body, who is a sportsman. So these companies, by changing rules, help people take their destiny in hands and make their own choices, accompany people into doing their own thing. The second one, which is with the example of Mark Zuckerberg, is companies that are driven by energy to overcome material constraints. I could also take the example of Elon Musk, for example, in that case. Talking with many people at the same time, having friends all over the world seemed something impossible. But with social networks, as Facebook demonstrated, it can become something very easy for everyone. So the constraint of keeping a vast network of people as friends or relatives has become much, much easier for everyone through the communities that Facebook is bringing. So this is overcoming limitations that we had in the past. And this kind of companies is driven, their soul is driven by overcoming constraints. Elon Musk, for example, thought that people could drive electric cars, but no one would believe it until he created Tesla. With SpaceX, for example, nobody thought we could launch a rocket and it could come back to its launch base after launching the satellite. He showed that was possible. So these people find their energy in demonstrating something that never happened before because people thought it was not possible. And that's where they find their energy. Now, the two last ones, the yellow and the green one, are based on experience. So they're much more into matter. The yellow one, we call the value producers. And we have the case with Jeff Bezos with Amazon. We could also take a French company like L'Oréal, for example. These companies are driven by the notion of potential. They want people, and themselves, of course, to express their own potential, what they could do, something they have inside themselves that they could do better. So Amazon, for example, is bringing people innovation, and they're mastering the speed of introduction of innovation to people so that people can immediately use new technologies, new aspects in their everyday life. L'Oréal, for example, is bringing new cosmetic products for people who just answer the exact needs of one period of time. And these companies have an ability to renew innovation very fast because they are driven by the desire of people. The green ones, which we call the experience producers, I took the example of Apple, could also take the example of Google. And these companies are driven by how to make people's experience the best thing ever. That's why we took the example of the Apple Store in our initial slide, because we wanted to show that something that is designed for enhancing the experience of a consumer, like an iPhone, for example, is making internet available on a very small device with just one finger, and you can access to everything, makes your life better. So here, the focus is on bringing to the maximum number of people something that will make their life better. I think the example of the Google search bar is also very talkative for this, because internet is something very vast, but you need a search engine to circulate within the internet, and Google has made it very easy, just a bar and you can type just everything inside, very fast and free. So again, in that case, there's a will to bring to the maximum number of people the quality of life that they could deserve. So these 6 examples, they're not just 6 among thousands. Any company you can refer to will fit into one of these 6 chords. And this we've been experiencing for more than 10 years in about 120 different markets. And we could demonstrate this is always the case.
Patrick, did you mention Dumézil? So where does it come from, just a little bit?
Sorry, yeah, you're right. So this analysis has been developed through history with a French historian and linguist called Georges Dumézil, who was a French academician, and his work was about defining the 3 initial dimensions: sovereign, which is space and time; warrior, which is about energy; and producer, which is about matter. So this is why we kept these names, warrior, sovereign, and producer. They are not marketing names, they're a reference to Georges Dumézil's work, who's been widely used with historical data, and we brought this work in the contemporary world and also into economy. So if we look at the business priorities that these companies will have, as I just mentioned, we will find on the top line, with the example of Walt Disney, for example, the fact of helping find one's place. If I buy a Louis Vuitton bag, I will be a kind of a king and I will have my place in society. So finding one's place is a very deep driver for people, and the whole world of Walt Disney, the imagination, helps people create worlds where they can also find their place. The one on the upper right part, we took the example of Sears, was mostly the idea of demonstrating authenticity and care for people. We're talking about real life, real day-to-day experience, and authenticity, bringing something true to people with strong values, is the key driver for these companies. With the warriors, the magenta one, as I gave the example of Nike, for example, is the driver, the business priority is to be a liberating game changer. They want to free people from things they think they could not do and get into their own way of doing things. The one in red, which was the example of Facebook, has the idea of generating constant improvements. So constant improvement is something you can expect from companies that always try to do better. Like the very famous slogan of Avis, the car rental company, saying, "We try harder." It's typical for that kind of companies. The yellow ones, they want to make people grow because they believe that the potential of people is something that needs to be promoted, that needs to be pushed. L'Oreal, for example, says, because I'm worth it. Okay, I'm worth it means I could do something even better. So they want to make people grow beyond their initial beliefs. You're worth something even better. Go there, get the experience. It will make your life better. Try to live the biggest life you can live. And the last one, the green one, is about making everybody's life better. So the driver for these ones is really having wide targets, and distributing in the easiest way possible things that people should have access to make their life better. So these 6 examples of business priorities are things we can find within companies, but also within people. And for example, some of you could take the example of your own focus in life. So of course here it's a little bit written in terms of what you would do in terms of your work, but are you more someone who wants to help people find their place? Are you a game changer? Are you generating constant improvements? Are you making people grow beyond their beliefs? Are you making everybody's life better? Are you demonstrating authenticity and care for people? So of course, this is a very simplified expression of our model, but maybe just with these 6 insights, there can be a way for you to find which one is more in resonance with your experience. Is it generating improvements? Is it helping people find their place? Of course, that can be experienced with different expressions, but these are really very important drivers. What we found out is that these drivers are what we can usually see. They are drivers within the aspect of identity. So what I'm going to show you right now is a second slide with the same format, but showing what are more existential issues behind these business priorities. Maybe just remind all of you that if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them just after this presentation. And so don't hesitate, of course, to make comments or critiques or whatever. And we'll be happy, of course, to answer that. So now, the existential issues that are behind these examples. So I'll go back and forth to express each of them. So if I start with help find one's place, what we found is that the existential issue behind that is, how can I be at the same time small? I'm just a person. I'm just a simple person, but I want to be somebody in the world. So I want to be big. How can I be at the same time small and big? What is inside me big that I can grow and express? There's a very nice example of this with the communication Coca-Cola has been using for a long time, which is one of these kind of companies, where, I don't know if you remember these, they had Christmas communications using a small penguins. And this penguin, there was a very young penguin, and he was getting lost on a piece of ice. And he felt alone in the world. And of course, the brand brought the Coca-Cola bottle, and he could feel belonging again to a group. And this notion of I feel alone, I feel small, I don't feel big enough for the world, and the brand will help me feel inside of me my greatness, is something that's very important. And the issue is really between being small and being big, finding your own greatness. The light blue on the right, we said what's important is to demonstrate authenticity and care for people. That's what we hear. What's behind that? Behind that is the fact that we live in groups, we live in families, we live in communities, we live in countries. We want to share something in common, because sharing creates something very powerful over time. But at the same time, what happens is we are all different. So if we pretend we share the same thing, but we don't really, then we're cheating. So how to be true to a group while being yourself with your own differences? And this is critical when we want to demonstrate care to people, is to recognize that people are all different, but it doesn't mean they cannot share very important things in common. That's why these companies are very focused on values and sharing something authentic, because we call that a superior common principle. And this superior common principle is something that helps people define in what condition they can be different, but they can experience something in common. And that's where the authenticity comes, because this superior common principle has to be driving the whole community, and it has to be governed in a very special way. These companies usually in their internal culture have very sophisticated organization and governance systems around the way they behave and the way they deal with their values. Now, let's go to the warrior ones. So we had the example of Nike, and the business priority was to be a liberating game changer. What's behind that is, if you want to be a game changer, but you don't want to be excluded from the society, you feel a kind of a rebellion inside of you. This rebellion is, I feel different, but I'm not like the light blue ones, somebody who wants to share values, to be together with other people. The difference I feel inside of myself is so deep, is so unique, is so in a disruption with what exists, that I need to bring my disruption into the world. So these companies say, you're a game changer, but you will free other people by adding your difference to what is already existing in a sense of building common good, building something better in common. And that's a very concrete approach. Nike is bringing sports material that will help people get in a different approach of their own body. And everyone has a very specific vision of his body. And Nike is proposing surprising stuff, like shoes with air or with different technologies that you wouldn't expect from shoes, so that people can express their difference through products that themselves express a difference. And that's what we expect from Nike. We expect them to disrupt their own market all the time. And this is what they do. Now, if we go to the red ones, so the business priority was to generate constant improvements. And these improvements are based on the fact that people and companies with this kind of profile feel they have a lot of energy to create things, to bring things to the world, to demonstrate what they can do, and exploits and challenges that they could take. And the challenge, the existential challenge for these companies and this kind of people is, how do you turn your own energy that is very big into something great for society? How do you fight to create something that will be good for many people, that will help society progress into the future? And that's your everyday energy, everyday improvements, as we said, constant improvements that will, in the end, turn into greatness and create your own recognition. So this profile, the existential issue, is based on turning energy into greatness. Now the two other ones based on experience. So we had the example of making people grow beyond their beliefs. What's behind that is the notion of invisible potential. We all have what we know about ourselves, which is some level of perception of our identity, but many people feel there's more behind that. There's more behind that, but we don't know how to express that. We don't know what it is. And we cannot express it with a just beautiful sentence saying, this is me. It doesn't work. It's something you have to discover every day. And that's what these companies and these people do. They care very closely about people. They help them overcome their own limitation, their own beliefs, into experiencing aspects of their potential. This is everyday work. This is just step by step. There's no way you can have a big step into something different because you would become crazy. It's something that can be frightening, but it's also thrilling to discover parts of yourself that you've never experienced before. And this is what these companies stand for. And the last one, the green ones. So we said, make everybody's life better. Why? Because your life, your experience also has potential, where in the two cases with the producer brands or organizations. But what we want to discover is what makes us unique deeply. So every experience that somebody can bring to us that can help us think about ourselves, that can help us liberate some form of creativity, some form of awareness about ourselves, will be helping us progress into discovering what is unique to ourselves. For example, this is my personal profile, and what I'm trying to share with you is that singularity is something we need to be more aware about because it's our uniqueness, and these are 6 ways to get into our uniqueness. Just to illustrate this example. So again, if you have any questions or comments about this, please go to the chat box. So a couple of examples to illustrate this. I talked about Louis Vuitton and the fact that just owning a Louis Vuitton bag transforms the feeling that you're great versus just normal, for example. The one on the right, I don't know if all of you are familiar with that brand. It's a New York street fashion brand that's very popular now. It's called Supreme. And Supreme has created a way to unify their worldwide target through not only skateboard stuff and fashion, but through a common culture, which is a cult of the 90s in New York and the youth of the 90s, which is skateboard, but also music, but also fashion, but also art and everything. And even their logo was inspired by an artist that was very famous in the 80s called Barbara Kruger. So this is creating a very unifying culture with very different young people from any country, from the US to Japan to Europe, of course, South Africa, South America, etc. And they're unified by this common culture that they consider something they want to share, something they're proud of, and that puts people together. So that's the superior common principle. For the wire brands, so the magenta one, I took the example of IKEA. IKEA can very easily turn your house into something very different. Just depends on you because it's very cheap. You make it on your own, so it's a very independent way of doing things. And it's a disruption in the way you live because in a few hours, your house can be totally different. Facebook, I already talked about. L'Oréal also, about this notion of really helping people grow their potential. And Apple also, I spoke about with the fact that having access to mobile internet, for example, or easy to use technology globally helps people not spend time thinking about the technology or very weird languages, but using their own competence, develop their own competence and learn more about themselves. So I hope this was very clear. I'm trying to be as quick as possible about that, but just to, as a summary, what I would say is that these 6 cores show that from what is expressed in the field of identity, we can find behind that this existential dimension where the subjects are much more sophisticated, like being small and big at the same time is not a kind of an everyday question, but it's a critical existential point. I remember also I saw ads in airports for a cigarette brand. I'm not promoting that, I'm not smoking. But the ad is very interesting. It's an ad for Marlboro, which is the worldwide leader of cigarettes. And the slogan of Marlboro says, "Don't be a maybe." And I think don't be small, be big, okay? And these brands, of course, show that they are along with you to help you get there. So of course, cigarettes is one way, Louis Vuitton is another way, Walt Disney is another way. So now, as Catherine and Eric introduced, what we would like to share with you is a small exercise that we can have you practice, which is based on how high your perception, your integration of your own singularity has been going in your life, and where do you stand now. So we have for this a small ladder, so it's 4 steps. And the figures I'm going to give are based on what we've been observing in Europe mostly, but I think would be not that different in the US or other parts of the world. We consider that about 20% managers deny there is any interest about company identity, about singularity, and about anything I was just showing you. I'm doing a lot of conferences with the managers, and I can see that about 1 out of 5 is just not at all interested in that kind of things. So it's very hard to do anything of that kind with these people. Now, the biggest group is about 60%. They have a very opportunistic use of their uniqueness, and they don't question it. They just call it kind of competitive advantage. And the competitive advantage is something you don't want to question. It works, and you keep it working, and that's it. Don't want to know why, don't want to know where it's going, just do it at best. So everything about competitive advantage, which is the theory of the last part of the 20th century, is really focused on this level. These people have medium interest in what we're talking about, and especially little interest about spirituality. But that's the biggest part of the people we can meet. Then about 15% really go into some exploration of their singularity, whatever the methods they use, of course, and they start thinking with the long-term dimension. And the question is, what do we stand for? What's our reason for being, the raison d'être, as we call it in French, the purpose of the company, if we talk more the American way, a more sincere exploration of what they stand for. And then less than 5% are able to align their company's acts with what they stand for, with their purpose, with their singularity, and make it instantly visible. Because you can always pretend, oh, I'm totally aligned with my values and my purpose. But if I cannot see it immediately, it's not true. It's just your storytelling. 5% make it really visible. For example, the Apple Store is making visible that Apple has a real focus on experience by its consumers. And none of their competitors, up to recently, have decided to go into that kind of stores. They're extremely costly. They're making money with that, but none of their competitors think this is relevant for them. So this makes an instantly visible difference based on the fact that we want people's experience to be extraordinary because we want them to discover themselves, not just because we want to sell iPhones. And this is leveraging immaterial value much more than any other case. So the question we want to ask you, and we'll get into that in detail in a few minutes, is where do you stand on this ladder in your organization, in your university, in your company, or for yourself? So I'm going to raise 4 questions, and then we're going to see that into more detail. First question is, have you ever reflected on your identity? Is it something that was in your mind really? Not just by the way, but is it a real question for you? And as I said, 20% of people say no. Then, have you ever asked yourself what makes you successful? Not just your competitive advantage in your product and your ideas, but your process. What's behind this success? What's the existential question behind that? 60% of people never really ask that question. then have you ever renounced anything due to your singularity? Because when you understand what you stand for, then you see there are things that are not good for you anymore. And you need to get rid of these things to give more space to what you really stand for. So you need to renounce something. And not renounce because you want to lose money. Renounce because you're going to make what you do in such a better way that you will get money, but much more than that. And the fourth question is, have you ever developed something that where you would overinvest in something where your competitors or anybody else wouldn't go, like the example of the Apple Store I was just talking about? So all of this we've seen has implications. We will get into the exercise for you in 5 minutes.
Perhaps Hélène have a question?
Sure.
Hélène, do you have a question?
Can you switch please your microphone? Hélène, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I was answering his questions with my thumbs up. So I was going along I was doing the exercise. Yes,
okay.
to 1 and 2 and maybe to 3 and not yet to 4.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, we'll discuss that a little later. Thank you. So just the impact of getting into the upper levels of our ladder. That has impacts in very different dimensions: business development, branding, marketing, human resources, management. I'm not going to go into details, but it's a kind of 360 influence. And this has business aspects, but also relationship aspects, communication aspects, innovation aspects, management aspects, of course. Leadership style, for example, is something that's influenced a lot by the singularity quotes. Just 2 examples. One is Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the red collar guy, and he's very famous now. I'm not presenting him. And the way he talks about life, about what's going to be the future of humanity, the future of technology, is always very surprising to people, because he's always talking about things we think are impossible, like living on Mars, like driving electric cars, and things like this. And the way he talks about that is very dramatic. For example, in the big bubble, the future of humanity is going to bifurcate in 2 directions. Either it's going to be multi-planetary, or it's going to remain confined to 1 planet, and eventually there's going to be an extinction event. So this is very radical way of speaking, because he believes he can attain something that everybody thinks is unattainable. He has the energy to get into this. And the result, I think you've seen the figures, is that now his company, Tesla, who's manufacturing less than 200,000 cars, is worth more than the sum of General Motors and Ford, who manufactures more than 5 million cars. And the value of the company now is more than $100 billion. This is demonstrating that when singularity is used at its maximum, and the guy is embodying the energy and the ability to overcome constraints, then he will sell to society the idea of greatness for the future. And a great future has a great value. And that's why his company is so high, because you know that market value and market capitalization is based on expectations for the future. And he's created enormous expectations on his company that Ford and General Motors together could not match. Now, quick second example is one of our clients in France, and it's a global company called Jeffco. Jeffco is a logistic company for industry. And originally, this company was a subsidiary of PSA Peugeot Group, which is a car manufacturer in France. And they were sold by this company. And they started to find new clients as much as they could to replace their original owner. But the problem is that none of the businesses they get into in this urgent phase, none of them were profitable. So what we worked with them to use Singularity to reveal what they really stand for. And we use what we call the Singularity drivers, which are ways to action Singularity to help them make very clear and very bold decisions. And we've seen numbers add up. So these 10 points are the Singularity drivers we were working with, and the one with the red square called infinite proximity was the major driver and became the project for the company. Over 2 years, we gained 20% in motivation, and that was measured with the independent survey. They got 9% more business every year in a market that is very flat and very difficult to grow. And their profit rose 400% in 2 years. And they changed their visual identity and their claim from global logistics for manufacturers to Partners Unlimited. And they gained many, many very important new clients like Tesla, for example. So we're now at a point where the idea is to share some of your questions about what has been presented, and then we'll go into the self-evaluation process. So maybe Eric, you want to share some of the questions you've seen?
So do you have some questions for Patrick? Yes, Claudio?
I have a question. Good morning or good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to see you again, Catherine and Eric. So my question is about the leaders of you using as example, Nike, Facebook. What were the criteria used to choose these companies and leaders in these examples? My question is based on the proposal, the unique self proposal. We are invited to evolve beyond your personal ego, beyond separate self and false self, in order to realize in deeper identity as a true self, as you show. So I'm not comfortable to see Facebook and Nike in these examples. Then my question is about it. What were the criteria used to choose it? Because for me, it's not Nike is not a good example in the good company to see in this context.
Okay, thank you, Claudio, for your question. These examples were only chosen to illustrate what are the 6 Singularity cores. They are not exemplary for the soul. Okay, none of them.
Okay,
none of them.
Thank you.
We are not sure that they are real spiritual leaders at that point, of course. So that was a good question, Claudio.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much for this explanation. Thank you, Catherine. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Claudio.
Also, the reason we didn't do what you say is picking people we think are very good examples of soul, is that you wouldn't get any of these famous people, probably. We would get much more unknown, or let's say not unknown, but partly known people, and it would be more difficult to illustrate my examples. That's the only reason. But of course, we could do that, and we've done that. What's very difficult is that this evaluation of the spiritual dimension of people, as we're going to have it with you now, is something very intimate. And sometimes people have a great spiritual dimension, but they don't express it that much. But they do have it. And in their everyday life, the way they manage people, they can really be using it, but you won't necessarily see it all the times. So we would need to go into a very detailed comprehension and experience with these people to be able to assess where they stand on the ladder. That's why we kept it separate. Any other questions?
Yes.
Hi.
Sarah.
Hi, very interesting. This is kind of a new area for me, and I really entered the room out of curiosity. But I enjoyed, you know, the link between, you know, how you're kind of using singularity versus competitive advantage, right? And I'm aware of Herminia Ibarra work, professor at London Business School. And she talks about authenticity paradoxes, right? Like authenticity in its meaning that we are the author of our lives, mean we evolve and we change our identity throughout our lives. So I wonder, in terms of like talking about singularity, do you take a snapshot of these companies at a particular time, or do you think the singularity would change and evolve in different stages of the company or the business or the entrepreneur life experience, etc.?
Okay, thank you for your question. We were lucky that we could work with some companies that were quite old. I have two examples. One is we worked with the Rothschild family and the bank, and they're about 250 years old, the banking activity. And we worked for Hermès, the French luxury company, which is about 180 years old. And in both cases, we had to go back in history to understand how it started, which is sometimes difficult because there's not always very important archives within companies. But we were lucky Hermès has a lot of archive, and the Rothschild family is still a family, so they have an oral transmission also about what happens. And what we could see is that the key elements of the singularity were already present in the beginning of the company. And I have another example I can give you, is we work with the French, the company that is managing the French airports. And this is a public company. And we could not have access to historical data because the way we were working and the group of people, they were not aware of the original aspects of it. So we worked on their singularity based on more recent elements. And they were quite surprised of what had appeared in this work about singularity. And afterwards, I asked them if we could do some historical work to research the origin of the company. And when we work about singularity, one of the steps we use is we have people write a very short text with the collective intelligence process using specific words. And so we had this text for the Paris Airport Company, and we found the original text that was the founding text for the company. And we compared the founding text with the singularity that people had expressed a few years ago. And it was just exactly the same. So they could reconstitute what were the key criteria of the original creation of the company without knowing about it. So I think to us, it was very demonstrative that singularity really goes through time, and that was about 75 years before. So it's a long time, and many people had gone into the company and went away and were replaced by other people, and probably we have maybe 10 or 15 generations of managers over the 75 years. And still this was transmitted without written stuff. And that's what's really interesting, is that singularity is something that's almost in people's body, in the company's culture, as much as just things you write. It's a real common experience. So to us, it's really something very, very stable over time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe we want to go now into the exercise?
Yes.
Okay, so what I propose is I'm going to go back to the 4 questions. We've added a few other ones so that you can think a little more. And I will ask Catherine and Eric to illustrate with their own experience. And then, of course, you can do it yourself with your own experience if you want to share. So the 4 questions you remember are, have you ever reflected on your identity? Have you asked yourself what makes you successful? Have you renounced to anything due to your singularity? Have you ever decided to overinvest in something?
Just a little point, you know, as a researcher in qualitative method, I thought that this question were too closed for me. And so I asked Patrick if we can find some other questions more open. And this is why you can make this, you can see that some questions are closed and some are very open.
So for the first question, Catherine, Eric, can you try to remember a time when you thought you first started thinking about your identity? So what were the circumstances? What did you discover that surprised you? And why do you think sometimes we avoid thinking about this?
Well, for me, it was not a typical, a unique circumstances. I mean, every time there is uncertainty, choices, decision to make, when I wonder about my destiny, my calling, what God wants concerning me. So this is the reply to under which circumstances. Then what did I discover that surprised me? Sometimes I think we can anticipate our destiny when we find a connection with God or something beyond ourselves. There are signs and indications in our path. I discovered my passion for research when I was 35 years old. We have to find our habitus or real path. What was surprising is how my identity, my passion for discovering hidden reality become incarnated in the materialistic life. And the other questions, why do we sometimes avoid thinking about our identity? I think that if we do not encounter ordeal and that life is calm and serene, we may have little questions concerning our identity. Or if we succeed to resolve problems in a rationalistic way, we can feel no need to navigate at the existential level. Things could be unconscious and may stay there. Sometimes we have questions in the childhood and the answers we get are sufficient for the rest of the life. And we feel that there is no need to explore further. So this is my reflection about this question.
Eric?
Yes, the circumstances, it was during a professional transition that I'm really questioned about my identity. I noticed I had confused my role in my business and who I really was. And I think questioning one's identity requires moving away from everyday life and materiality in order to think in a broader way.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So if any of you want to comment or add anything on this, please feel free to do so.
Or if you need just 5 minutes to reflect a little bit.
Yeah.
No question, reaction? Just to share a reflection.
Okay, so maybe we should proceed. So I suggest we move to the second series of questions. So the initial question was, have you ever asked yourself what makes you successful? So I invite you to think about your greatest successes, whatever they are. They can be professional, personal successes, and ask yourself the following questions. One is, how do you define success in your own eyes? Then, what are the specific qualities that would explain your success? And how do you think people perceive who you are? And maybe differently from what you perceive are your real reasons for success, because this can be something people really understand, or it can be something very personal, but that is not understood by everyone. So it's important at that moment to understand what is your own explanation and what is shared with other people. So Catherine, Eric, maybe you want to also share your points?
So how do I define success? Well, I have two examples of success. The first one, you know, you could be surprised, is for me really something really important in my life is to be a mother. So it's a realization of an aspiration, and I was happy because I could have my children when I was young. So that was something very important. So I don't know if we can consider that as a success, but this is by my way of thinking. And second moment, very important in my life, and as I explained you, thinking over identity is also a path, and now I'm 59 years old, and so many things happen in my life, and I was lucky to write my thesis, and it was really important for me. It changes my life. So it was a real success for me because I was able to concentrate, to develop creativity, curiosity, to work on concepts. And it was a full exercise, and for me it was a real success. In both cases, to be a mother and to write a thesis, I can feel my utility, innovation, and a form of continuity also. About the specific qualities, I had endurance, the need to understand and to express my originality. And then how do I think people perceive who I am? Well, they say my originality, my benevolence, my reliability. That's it.
What about you, Eric?
Yes, in my point of view, define a success. Basically, it is when I reach a goal. So, for example, like my thesis defense, for example. Our specific qualities, for me, it is the training and a strong preparation. Training, strong preparation are success factors. And for the third question, I think people see me as a persistent person or the determined person.
Okay, thank you. Any comments? I, of course, invite you to do the same exercise for yourself.
Give a little bit, some minutes, maybe just to reflect on themselves. Claudio, are you speaking? Because you switch off your microphone. If you want to share, you can. But
I will talk about the high how I define success, I use the concept from positive psychology. It's a flourish. Flourish is when you can use our potential and put in action your potential. Like an plant is a seed. You put the seed on the ground and the seed flourish. For me, success is the concept flourish. Put in action your potential, our potential. It's for me, it's success.
Okay, thank you.
Other people wanting to share?
Okay.
Perhaps Amelia? Amelia, yes?
Yes, I just want to share a little bit. I'm Amelia from Jakarta, Indonesia. And I think in where I come from, it's a little village. The self-actualization is very different. It's like how you can make a difference to your community, to your environment, and to the universe. So it's a very different way of thinking, of the Eastern way of thinking. So I kind of miss the way of thinking because now I'm teaching in a business school. And then of course now everyone is teaching about growth and wealth creation and everything. And I kind of miss, the small village way of thinking. I just want to share that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. We can go on, Patrick, maybe with the next.
Let's get going. So the third question was, have you ever renounced anything due to your singularity? So what I invite you to do is to think about the risks you had to take to assert your singularity. So for example, how did you have to change yourself to adapt and to fit others' expectations while being more and more yourself? What you had to give up in order to access to your true self, as we were talking about renouncements, and also what did you learn about yourself that allowed to become who you really are? One question is about the impact of the context, then internally what you had to give up, and then finally what did you learn about yourself becoming who you really are? So maybe again, Catherine and Eric, you want to give your example?
Okay, because progress really these questions are more and more difficult and more intimate. For me, what did I have to change? Maybe I had, from an external point of view, I have to find the favorable environment, and I have to have a degree with a long time to study. Meeting new people, moving into a new location, distancing some friends from the countryside where I lived, accepting to live in a big city. So this is something I had to change a little bit because it was very comfortable to be in the countryside. So I have to change this adaptation. And then I have what I have to give up, when you become a researcher, you have to accept frugality, restriction of materialistic richness, and your life is not so much comfortable, so you have to accept this. But okay, you do that because you feel it's so important. And then what did I learn about myself? I discovered my talent to make people speak thanks to my listening aspiration, and then my creativity, my possibility to uncover concepts from facts and information disclosure. that's it. Eric.
Yes, first I need to distinguish between elements of my singularity to remain who I am in my relationship to others, and do not confuse myself with the other. It's very important for me. I left a kind of role of representation to focus of my own needs, especially my freedom. And what I learned, I realized that in any situation, I needed to define a part of freedom to remind myself and to bring who I am.
Thank you, Eric. So again, a few minutes for all of you to think about your own examples, your own experience. And, again, we'll be happy for you if you could share some of them.
Yes, Rhonda?
We can't hear you, Rhonda. No. It's
there's an issue with the microphone, probably.
It's totally impossible to hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, it's perfect.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for this insightful and provocative conversation. Given the insights I've had already about my singularity is helping me reflect on this question. And so I will talk about two things that in hindsight, I realized I had to renounce to due to my singularity. One was I had been a consultant in a multinational corporation, and I found myself doing shopping to satisfy, to justify my continuing to work there. So inevitably, I decided to quit the job, and I kind of overreacted and just left the whole field of industrial organizational psychology. But I think the truth in that reaction was I needed to not be working for a multinational corporation to really become who I am. And then another example is that I felt led to eat a vegan diet. And I learned that I had to not participate in suffering, in the suffering that's related to eating a kind of standard diet. So those are two examples. One, I guess they're both fairly big, but and I think now, given this conversation, I can see that it has to do with my singularity being associated with helping people express their invisible potential. And so I think I've had to give up maybe more things in order to reach that destination.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Oh, the example could be quite materialistic.
5 minutes left.
Yeah. So maybe we'll move to the next step so that then we're over with the presentation. So the first one, the highest level on the ladder that we're showing today is, have you ever decided to overinvest in what you alone can do? So I suggest you think about experiences when you acted radically with an inspired motivation. So what do you dare to do today that previously seemed unattainable to you? And maybe we just had an example with some of that. What kind of inner coherence have you reached? And when communicating with your inner self, what clear messages do you get about who you really are? So here we have even more intimate questions. Catherine, Eric?
Okay, for the first question, what do you dare to do today that previously seemed unattainable to you? I dare to identify talents from others, a little bit just like Rwanda, and make them contributing and merging in the perspective of a spiritual management in order to make the management more competent, benevolent, and just. And this is quite concrete. For example, right now I try to write a book, and normally when I was writing a book, I was doing that by myself, whereas here I ask different talents I have around me, and I try to make them contributing, and so it is as if I was not the first one, but that the other people were the first one, and I had to organize that. And what kind of inner currents have I reached? Well, I have clearly an alignment of my action, my behavior, and my passion, my motivation. And this is really simple, in fact. And when communicating with my inner self, well, I think that I know that I have to conceptualize and diffuse knowledges about spirituality in the field of management, and that's it.
Thank you, Catherine. So, as we have just little time, maybe some of you want to also react to this.
And Eric, maybe you want to share.
1 minute left. So there too, today I give a comfort and security more easily to move on to more authentic projects that are necessary for the balance of the planet, for example. Inner coherence is I feel liberated and therefore more agile and more connected to cosmic signals. I feel my intuition is developing. And inner self, in all circumstances, promote the common interest and act for it.
Thank you. So, final word from the audience.
There is 1 minute left.
It's almost over.
Thank you so much for exposing.
It's over. We hope that these questions could help you to develop your idea of singularity, and hope all the best for the Academy of Management in this virtual Zoom meeting. All the best.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you going to post this in the files, your presentation?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, thank you so much.
You can download it, no problem.
But you can also contact us anyway. We
I
would be
would
very
love to.
happy to share every resource we get.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you, Eric. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Bless you.
Have a nice day and good continuation
Bye-bye.
for the program. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.